Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. In South Africa, like any other country, official documents such as birth certificates and driver's licenses usually rely on gender markers to classify people as being male or female. While our gender may begin with the assignment of our sex at birth, it doesn't end there. Some gender researchers believe a person's gender identity is quite complex. Gender activist Dr. Corne Davis of the University of Johannesburg is one of them. She holds a view that she says is backed by the United Nations research, which attests to the notion that gender is far more complex than being either this or that. She argues that gender is a spectrum. So then where do we fit in that gender spectrum as individuals? To find out more and have a longer conversation, let's welcome her senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg's Faculty of Humanities. Thank you once again for coming back, because we had you here as part of a women's panel and your take was so different. There was a need for you to come back.
Yes, because when we discussed, we were talking about gender equality. And in that framework, we were talking about male-female gender equality.
Yeah.
So I pointed out that it's far more complex than that, because at the moment, while we are aware that we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, intersexual, queer plus, it's more complex than that. We have at this stage a range of 71 sexual identities, gender identities existing that we know of. So the conversation needs to broaden, because if we now talk gender equality, it's far more complex than that.
It's interesting that we're having our conversations, this conversation in June, and it's Gay Pride Month. In fact, if our camera is able to, I'd like them to zoom in on your boots, which kind of like speak to that conversation. What should events or a commemoration such as Gay Pride Month, what kind of conversations should they be having? Should they only be about gay, or should they be about recognition of this whole spectrum that you're talking about?
It should be about the recognition of the spectrum, because if we look at where United Nations Global Compact is at, where we want to end discrimination against people, when we want to encourage acceptance of everybody for who they are and what they are, then we need to have the conversation so that people can understand. At the moment, there's just so much ignorance. People cannot identify with. For example, people don't understand what it must be like to be born with both sets of genitalia.
Yeah.
People don't understand the chromosome components, the genetic components. So there's this socialized perception of gender, which means that you socially gay or queer or whatever you identify yourself as. But there needs to be an understanding that there are certain ways that people are just born into that gender identity.
So our gender assignment might be biological, but there's also practical uses for it, like we said in our introduction, that government knows how to classify you as a citizen of the country. As an academic, how do you think these sort of conversations should be taking place with government in terms of the ability to identify their citizens according to gender?
That's going to take a long time to get to that point where you're going to identify, because the biological factors, we need to distinguish. We have sex, which you are saying, your genitalia, your set of how you were born. But then you've got gender, which is socially constructed. It is about the expectations of society, how certain genders should behave.
Yeah.
So that is socially constructed, gender.
It's a global society, though, so it means turning around a global society.
It means that. So you must remember, we still have 72 countries that criminalizes homosexual behavior.
Some of them on the African continent.
Many of them on the African continent criminalize the behavior. So there's a very long way to go in terms of just acknowledging the existence of all these different gender identities.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discrimination still going on.
But there might be discrimination coming from the people who classify themselves as heterosexual or either boy or girl. But what about the people who fall within the gender dysphoria space, who are trying to figure out who they are? What kind of assistance do they get?
You see, this is where the gender dysphoria comes in, because it's the anxiety and depression. That's why it's been called gender identity disorder. So it's been addressed as a psychological condition.
Do you agree that it's a disorder?
I don't believe it's a disorder. It becomes a disorder to the extent that people stigmatize and reject. That is why these people experience anxiety and stress, because they know they are not the gender that they are associated with.
Society expects them to be.
They expect them to be, but they fear to live it or to be it because they're discriminated against and rejected. I mean, you can imagine the pressures in families who do not accept other identities.
Yeah.
Remember, we've got heteropatriarchy in South Africa. We've got the issue that
what does that mean?
That means that it's patrarchy in the first place, but it's dominated by heterosexuality.
Okay.
So it's gender-based. And also, don't forget, Van der Schuyf reported in 2015 the high levels of corrective rape. Now, the lesbians are being raped to correct them.
Yeah.
I mean, that is such a contradiction. I heard a report
on radio just yesterday where a lesbian person was saying they went to report at a police station, and the police officials laughed at her, saying, "Why would you allow a man to have sex with you?" And she's saying, "I'm here to report that it was not consensual."
But you see, there's a lot of ignorance still. There's also very little known about male rape in South Africa and how prevalent that is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of information that needs to go out, and people just simply don't understand.
You're saying that your work is backed up by United Nations research. How broadly is this conversation being held?
At the moment, the United Nations Global Compact, South Africa is a member of that Global Compact. And they've launched a strong campaign. It was the first time documented actually in 2011, where they wrote policy about non-discrimination against any form of sexual or gender identity. And South Africa is part of that compact, so we're part of that conversation. So that conversation is still being held. There's an Office for Sexuality, AIDS and Gender at the University of Pretoria, and they published a paper, Brouwers, I think, Pierre Brouwers, he's the co-director of that centre. And he published an article on how far we come. It's still a pipe dream to get sexual and gender identity. And they pointed out that we are still sitting with these issues of heteropatriarchy, of the discrimination. It's inevitable, but not unidirectional, he said.
This call by some quarters for neutral birth certificates, how ready is South Africa for that?
South Africa is not near ready for that. I think globally, if you think 72 countries, I mean, remember when we talk about the happiness index, we talk about 153 countries. So if we say 72 countries already they criminalize, I think the world is ready for that yet. And it becomes a technical issue, because when you are born, you don't know what gender you are, you're just a newborn person. So now it must be pre-decided on your behalf that you may want to be gender neutral. It becomes ethical issues.
So when we live in a country where you have to be 18 to vote, realistically, at what age can a person decide where they would like to fall within the spectrum?
Well, actually, we were having this conversation last night. I was talking to my daughter, Nicola. No, teenagers, they know everything. So she's saying to me that your actually maturity, mental maturity, is only by the age of 27. So within that range of 18
That's
to
like
20,
a whole lifetime.
Yeah. No. You can more or less decide who you want to be. But, I mean, we all know as individuals that we know by an early age who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah. What does the future hold for this conversation? As you say, there are still countries that criminalize choices. What does the future hold?
I think it's my take is always education. There's a lot of conversations, a lot of communication, and it is really an important issue, and it's something I feel really passionate about, because what happens is that we leave people excluded. So in other words, we discriminate through pure ignorance, not understanding what other people are going through. And my big mission is about this happiness index, about South Africa, that is number 105 on the happiness index, which means we are not very happy people. And there are many reasons for that. And we know that we are 7 out of 10 women in Gauteng experience gender-based violence. We understand that. But to progress, to create a fair and happier society, surely we can instill some sensitivity, we can educate.
You were saying that it brings about anxiety and depression.
Yes.
And these are one of the biggest social conditions we're dealing with at the moment.
Absolutely, and I believe we can make a difference.
What drew your interest to this conversation, and how do you classify yourself?
Well, I'm a heterosexual female, but I've been very sensitized. I started off as a gender-based violence activist after doing the Matla Bana campaign, when I realized how many children have been victims of child rape, of which people are also ignorant. And from there on, I made it my business to sensitize and to inform and to get rid of the discrimination, because everybody deserves their piece of happiness and
do you still do your activism work? We're wrapping up Child Protection Week this week. What are your thoughts about that particular conversation?
Well, I'm a trustee of Matla Bana. So we normally, Matla Bana, well-known NGO, campaign against child rape and secondary abuse. So we are normally aware of all the activities. There's a lot of programs that we run through schools. There's an annual cycling tour that we do to raise awareness and for children where to get help and what is right and what is wrong. So we are continuously campaigning.
What are the kind of stories coming out from there?
Well, it's interesting, you know, because children normally don't speak out. I was astounded that when I did this campaign with the students in 2013, do you know that they were 20, 21, turning 21, that they spoke out for the first time? That it's silenced.
Yeah.
So one of the campaigns was silence is not golden.
Yeah.
You know, and they won a Massa Gold Ignite Award with rape does not exist if you don't talk about it.
Are you having conversations at all about children who are already recognizing that their psychological and emotional makeup doesn't fit their physical or their, as you say, societally allocated
There's not
gender?
enough. Those conversations are not happening to a significant extent yet. Not enough.
Yeah.
There's not enough awareness because there's still the discrimination male-female that's so dominant in South Africa.
So many other things to deal with.
There's so many other things to deal with that it's not high up on the agenda yet.
We're going to wrap up our conversation. How, ideally, if you sit and think about it, how should this conversation be going forward?
I believe we've got a fundamental role to play as tertiary institutions, which we do. UJ hosted the first LGBTQI plus summit in 2018. We are continuing this conversation. We have events. I presented a paper at that summit as well, and we're going to publish a lot about it and spread the word and be activists.
Thank you so much for making time to come through on a Saturday morning. I know it's family time.
You're welcome.
Dr. Corne Davis from the University of Johannesburg.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for starting a conversation.
Thank you.
All right, you're watching The Agenda. Let's take a break.